After a long while, we finally got more Cuphead. This time it's in the form of a show on Netflix. So let's get over my thoughts for the season. Let me know what you guys think about the show as well. The show is based on the hit indie game called Cuphead. The game was developed by MDHR, who really wanted to capture the old-fashioned cartoon style and bring it into a video game, which required a lot of work and effort, and the game looks amazing for it. There is also plans for a DLC in the near future, but in the meantime we'll watch the show and see how it stands out. First, we should address the animation style. It is done with modern animation, as opposed to the style it was originally based on, with the exception to the live, modeled, and watercolor backgrounds, which were techniques used in the golden age of animation during the 30s and 40s. Of course, hand-drawn animation is going to be far more situational, and I'm not expecting to see it used for a TV show. It also isn't necessarily required to pull out this kind of aesthetic. They do mimic the different techniques, emotions, and reactions that were used at the time. This included some scenes where they will also create small model backgrounds that you would have seen back in those shows, such as the short Popeye meets Sinbad the Sailor. The Cuphead Show is definitely worth a watch if you wanted to see what a refined modern style of this animation would look like. So while it doesn't try to imitate the style one for one, it does include moments that at the very least may remind you of those older shows. I do appreciate all the effort and hard work to make it look as good as it does. It looks great overall and gives the show that unique style while not having to go through the long process of the hand-drawn animation. As for the premise of the show, it is another slice of life show. And I'm just going to have to stop here and go on a tangent. I'm really tired of slice of life animated shows. Don't get me wrong, they can be done right, but I'll just list a few. Big City Greens, Crate of the Creek, We Bare Bears, The Loud House. All of these slice of life shows, they just don't work for me. They're fine, they can work well with teaching life lessons and morals, but I just want to see a unique world if we're going to use animation. If this show could be made into live action without losing much of anything, I feel you've limited your own imagination a little too much. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the case with the shows I listed, just that some of them give me that impression. Out of the shows that run this kind of trope, my personal favorite would be Regular Show. So chances are, the less similar a slice of life show is to that, the less likely I'll enjoy it. Fortunately, the Cuphead Show is in a wacky world, and virtually everything is sentient. It gives us something neat to look at while watching the show and just trying to figure out how this world works. Instead of the show being based on the events that took place in the game, it does stand out as its own thing, which is perfectly fine. Yes, the Devil and King Dice are still here, and very much do want to continue to antagonize Cuphead and Mugman, just not in every episode. The personalities of Cuphead and Mugman are the exact opposite of each other. Cuphead is more careless and a troublemaker, while Mugman is more cautious and overthinks every situation. Mugman ends up getting dragged or coaxed into Cuphead's antics, and chaos ensues. Rinse and repeat for most of these episodes. Their chemistry reminds me a bit of Huey, Dewey, and Louie from DuckTales or from the older shorts. They all want to have fun and explore, but something bad is bound to happen. Just like the kind of cartoons of that era, there are some great physics-defying logic that the show uses, which is great. The show is just lacking some impact for me. I guess the best way for me to describe it is to give an example. If you wanted to watch a modern cartoon show that mimics the slapstick, pacing, and comedy that you would find from an older show or the Looney Tunes short, you're better off watching Wander Over Yonder.
You remember me, right?
Wander Over Yonder may be a little obnoxious at some points, but the comedy is more on par with a Looney Tunes short than just about any episode of the Cuphead Show. There are some good episodes in the Cuphead Show, but nothing that really stands out to me. It's great in animation, in the music, and it is very serviceable. The way I look at it though is this. If you're going to use an older art style like this, you gotta have to put your best foot forward. They did so in many ways, but I guess my expectations are kind of heightened due to how scarring and just how much was going on in the game that the show is based on. Again, it's not that I want the show to be the game, that's not the point, but I guess for now the show feels a lot more reserved that I can't help but notice it. I want to see more of the Cuphead Show, and I want to see more shows use this kind of style. The show is still good, don't get me wrong, I just feel they could have done a little more with the setups and make them more grand. Moving on, there is an underlying plot of the show, but the majority of the episodes are just one-offs, which does fit with how cartoons at this time wrote their episodes. The show is aimed at a younger audience with its storytelling, which is perfectly fine, but then again, so is DuckTales, so there goes that argument, I guess. It's not that I'm expecting greatness out of the show, but it really does feel like the first season of a new show, trying to figure out characters and keeping things close to the vest. Believe me, I watched a handful of reviews before making my own, and it does seem like everyone can agree that the animation and art style is great. I have no complaints at all on that. However, the reviews that I did see, no one really talked too much about the plot of each episode. basically giving the show a pass on the episodes while praising the animation. The show can still look great, but still be bad or subpar in other areas. And as for someone who covers video games, there's more to it than just looks. Some of the plots for an episode can be obvious and feel a little dragged out, and there's one episode in particular that I just had to keep fast forwarding. I'm not going to say which episode it was, but I'll explain the cliche that I was using, which also happens to be a cliche that I personally hate. So the cliche that I do hate is the one where there's a misunderstanding between two characters, but instead of clearing things up right there and then, they drag it out for the entire length of the episode, causing a character to act differently until the misunderstanding is resolved. There are ways to make this cliche work and not feel too forced. In this episode though, it was obvious that there was a misunderstanding. So the entire comedy of the episode is the character doing things they otherwise would never do in order to appease the other characters. Basically making a fool of themselves for no reason whatsoever. It's difficult for me to like an episode that uses that cliche, and the jokes used to justify that episode just didn't land for me. And yes, that is correct. If you know which episode I'm talking about, the one gag the entire episode was building up for just did not land for me. It would work fine on its own and I would laugh at it on its own thing. However, because of the cliche the show had to use to get there, I just could not enjoy it. It's not so much that I have a gripe with the show itself, but more that I can't stand that cliche being used in most episodes. The only other episode I didn't like was the baby episode, because of course there needs to be a baby episode. It is an early episode, so perhaps they just wanted to try something out, or use certain expressions or jokes made for that kind of plot. The conclusion to that episode had no reward, and felt like a waste of time once we know how the baby was going to act. For a slice of life show that could potentially teach you something, there is no moral, there is no lesson to learn from this episode. Which is fine, you don't need to learn something from every episode, but I just had no enjoyment watching that one. I'm not sure which episode I hated more, but I guess the misunderstanding episode actually did have some sort of lesson to learn, even with all the cringe and the obvious plot twist, and you do get to learn a little more about one of these characters. Outside of those two episodes still, the show is far more bearable and easier to watch. And just as a side note, I know Wander Over Yonder also had a baby episode, and I did not like that episode either, in case you were wondering. Back to the Cuphead Show, it's not great, but it's also not bad with the exception of those two episodes. Each episode is a little less than 15 minutes, so it's easy enough to get through most of them. Cuphead Season 2 is set to release during the summer, as the final episode of Season 1 ended on a cliffhanger. So let's see what they plan to do with the show then. I really do hope they up the stakes a little, and we do get to see some more off the wall and wacky antics. Will they now try to spice things up, or will it just be more of the same? Just before we end, I wanted to give a shout out to MangaKamen's review. If there's anything I missed or didn't explain all that well, I would recommend watching his take on the show. Link to his videos in the description and on the info box in the corner of this video. I don't share the exact same feedback as him, but there is a lot of common ground. And his review did really help me out figure out exactly what my problems were with the show. That's all I got to say on the show for now. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are about it. Did you like it or did it not meet your own expectations? So until then, I am Mr. Rain, and I will see you next time.